Hello, my name is Janice B. Gordon, and this is Scale Your Sales Podcast. Welcome to Scale Your Sales Podcast, listed number 9 of 43 best podcasts for every sales professional. I am Janice B. Gordon, the customer growth expert, recommended by LinkedIn Sales as one of 15 innovating influencers to follow. In today's episode of Scale Your Sales Podcast, we speak to a LinkedIn sales expert. We talked about the kind of 2K starting points of LinkedIn sales. And the first, she said, was making sure you get your profile right. I mean, after all, this is your shop window. Often sales leaders want to jump to using Sales Navigator, but actually the profiles have to be really important. Another aspect is being very intentional and strategic about your network to make sure that you've got the right people in your network. Do you have the people that you can sell to, or the influencers? And we talked a lot about how you make that happen and why it's so important at all levels in the organization. My next guest is a leading independent LinkedIn consultant, instructor, and speaker. She is the author of the best-selling book, LinkedIn for Personal Branding, the ultimate guide. Considered a pioneer of women in B2B sales, she enjoyed a long first career in field sales for office technology products. Welcome to Scale Your Sales Podcast, Sandra Long.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you. I can't wait to have our conversation.
Well, I'm going to tell the audience that you're a women's sales expert. We're part of this group, and I met you for the first time when we were in Phoenix, weren't we, last year? So that it's been wonderful. I've been following you for such a long time, and I love your work. So thank you for the opportunity to have you on and learn from you here. I really appreciate it.
Well, what's great about the network is we all learn from each other, so I appreciate it too.
Yeah. So I'm really interested about how you work with organizations. I know that you help them to be more visible and, engaged with their audience and their customers. So tell me how this happens.
So there's a lot of different variations of how this happens, but I would say one of the most common ways I work with is sales teams and helping them use LinkedIn to have better conversations, more conversations, have better visibility, more traction, get more leads, develop relationships, all of those good things that we need to do as salespeople. So that's probably my number one thing. But I also work with executive teams. I work with sellers who are focused on events, who want to leverage, whether it's marketing teams or sales teams that really want to leverage events. And I even do some work with universities.
Right. Okay. So it's in leveraging events. I remember, this podcast has been going for almost 5 years. And I remember talking to Alison Hyman, who we know who's an absolute god within our community. And I remember talking to her about organizations not really leveraging events, not really doing things prior, during, and certainly post events. And at that time, LinkedIn was big, but not like it is now. It's like an essential tool. So I'm really interested to understand how you help organizations. Events are often offline and then bring it back online. How does that work? The pre, the during, and the after?
Well, it's a huge opportunity, and oftentimes it's a big miss, as you pointed, or as Alice pointed out. Think about it. Companies spend, or whether it's a company or an association or whatever agency, they're spending millions of dollars, or either thousands or millions of dollars on events. They send people, they exhibit, they do it, whether they're organizers or exhibitors or sponsors. And yet they don't necessarily leverage LinkedIn, which is so wonderful to really bring that community along with them. And it starts well before the event. So there's a lot of things that organizations can do. And I guess I put, in various clients into different categories. Some of my clients are actually, they own the event. They are the organizer. And what their goals are a little bit different from everyone else. Everyone else is either an exhibitor, a sponsor, a speaker, or an attendee. Those four groups, those folks, they're there to get visibility, get leads, get relationships, networking, knowledge. That's their goals. Whereas the organizers, their focus is more, they have to obviously get registrations, sponsors, and they have to make all those people happy, engagement. So a slightly different focus, but LinkedIn can help across the board, because if you're an organizer, you can use LinkedIn to create that community around your event beforehand. Get them all excited, get them engaged, and so that they're actually networking ahead of time. If you look at surveys of event goers, one of the main reasons they go is to network. And what happens is they sign up, they have no idea who's going to be there. They show up, they get business cards, right? It's just not, it's not leveraging the opportunity. So for on that side, the attendee or the speaker or sponsor, get them involved in that community so that they go to those events with appointments, with meetings, with face-to-face opportunities, right? And they use LinkedIn throughout with content, afterwards follow. I mean, I know this is a question that I'm going on and on, but I get very excited because there's so much opportunity with events. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I certainly, as I'm often speak at conferences, and it's a lot of work.
It is.
It is a lot of work, but I always make sure I block out the day after a conference event, and I then go through LinkedIn because I ask people to connect with me. And, I also sometimes, depending on the event, actually might task them to take a picture and they might win something, because I really want the event organizers and myself, of course, to actually get that reach and get that, people involved to be part of the community. So I'm very intentional about making sure I'm keeping the people that have booked me happy with that amount of engagement and interaction. But I also,
Yes.
potential customers, make sure I spend a whole day after the event literally starting to have more of those conversations, getting testimonials from people that said they loved, the presentation. What was it about the presentation you had? What are you going to do next? But also prior to the event as well, all of the engagement. So few people do that. It's like I completely agree with you. That is where the real work is done, because it's often just one day or a few hours.
Right.
You really can max out the event by having, a good day or so before, and certainly the day after the event, having that time to really engage with people.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up as what you do as a speaker. You're a very savvy speaker then, because you're the kind of speaker an organizer would want to have, who is bringing that visibility. Most speakers aren't doing that. Most exhibitors, everyone involved, and it's such a wonderful opportunity. And I love the way you take the day after. And the other thing is, when you're speaking at an event, isn't it wonderful when you can connect with some of the people ahead of time,
Yeah.
and you can learn about them so you can speak about them.
Yeah.
So obviously, if you're a speaker, you can't necessarily connect with everyone who's there, but once you're featured, you'll be getting invitations. But you can yourself proactively reach out to organizers, sponsors, and exhibitors. Wouldn't they love to hear from you as a speaker? Like, I'm speaking, I know you're exhibiting. Like, that's a great little pre-connection that you can make, right?
Yeah. I think that this is, even organizers don't max it out enough, but certainly whether you're a speaker or an exhibitor in particular, that's why you're there. But not
Yes.
actually using the two kind of platforms in unison is a real missed opportunity. So I love that you're helping them to focus on that and really make the most of the investment they've already made.
Oh, it's such a big investment. And so to me, events is like a whole subsection or specialty when you think about sales. I mean, there's a lot to talk about with sales, but being good at events and leveraging events to me is a very important skill.
Yeah, yeah. And it's often such a big part of their budget, isn't it, really? Like they feel they have to be at this event, but actually they're not capitalizing on the fact that they are at the event as well. So I love that you focus on that's one aspect that you focus on. It's a great opportunity to bring up with the last conversation I had, which was many years ago, pre-pandemic, with Alice. I'm really glad that we've kind of brought that back to bring this back into focus for many of the listeners here, because it's a missed opportunity. I'd really like to kind of talk a bit more about people in the sales team. So you mentioned that you really do help sales teams to capitalize on the relationships and engage with their customers. So I'd like to understand, how do you know that you have the right people within the team? Can you kind of help to identify that? Because online engagement is so important in sales, and there's a lot of resistance of sales professionals to get involved online.
You know, it's funny that you're bringing this up. I had a conversation with a prospect yesterday about this, who had a very seasoned, successful team who is very resistant. And so I run into that. You know, it's, you know, the people that are going to be from the future, you know, future focused are going to be those that are continuous learners, those people that are grabbing for technology and for ways to do their job better. I mean, so yeah, we all face that. There are definitely very much pockets of resistance, but you know, it's funny that happened to me yesterday. But I would say the majority of sales leaders that I talk to are very energized about this topic. They know that, you know, it's much different than it was 10 years ago. I've been doing this for 10 years. You know, 10 years ago, there was many of the leaders didn't really understand and get that this was not just a job platform. And that's really come full circle. So, and most sales leaders know in their team, they're going to have some resistors, but they're going to have some, you know, people that are going to be very focused on the future and want to grab this. So it's worked out well, but I know I'm looking for a continuous learner, someone who's enthusiastic. People that are generally social tend to enjoy this and not be afraid. There's a fear factor, you know, and it's not just in sales, but there's a fear factor about LinkedIn. People feel like, well, if I make a mistake, what's going to happen if I make a mistake? They're so worried about it. And I try to take that fear away.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you have those that think that it's all about posting about what you had for lunch, and
Yeah,
others that are very think that you need to be vulnerable, and they, you know, not comfortable with that, or you know, they don't know what to post, they don't know what to say. So there's a
right.
whole kind of like variety of people that have a fear.
It's,
So
yes, a lot.
what's your kind of starting point with this, with most people, when you're, you know, talking to sales professionals and trying to encourage them to get online?
Well, so the starting point for me is always the profile. It's funny because I have team leaders calling me saying they want sales navigator training, or they want, um, you know, they want to learn they want to do a content workshop, which is great. This is what we do. But if your profile isn't working for you, that's like your foundation, your first foundation. To me, there's two foundational pieces: the having a profile that is buyer focused, prospect focused, that talks about how you help is the number one thing. And the second foundational piece is having a strategic selling network. Now that sounds so simple. And people say, oh, I'm fine. I got 500 connections. It doesn't mean you have a strategic selling network. You may not be connected to the people you should be connected to. So that needs to be systematic. So those two things, because why are we using Sales Navigator or even creating content if you don't have the right people that you're connected to that will see it, or your profile isn't set up? So the foundation it's really starting in those two spots. And then we
That's
branch out.
that's interesting. Okay, so the profile, you've got to get that connect, because that's like your shop window, isn't it?
It
Tells
is.
people. But I'd really like to delve into your strategic network. How do you know that you have got the right people within your network? What's the starting point of that?
Well, you can analyze your network. I mean, you can take a look at your network and just and so there's certain things you should be looking for. So one easy way for a salesperson to do this, and this is just one thing, you can take your pipeline, right? And look at the top 5 companies on your pipeline, go into LinkedIn, look at their company pages. How many connections do you have? So I will tell you this, Janice, it's shocking, but pretty much every time I do that exercise, they'll open that up and they'll say, okay, here's my number one top prospect, and I've got one connection. Well, that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
That's a big problem. We all know there's typically for most B2B sales between 6 to 8 decision makers, and how many influencers? There's probably 20 people we should know for a complex sale. And yet the salesperson might have one, maybe 3 or 4. Are they the right connection? So that's like the first thing. So you look at your pipeline, then you look at your customer base, and then you look at, where you went to school and where you worked and where you work now, where you used to work. There's all different ways you can systematically make sure you have a strategic network. And then thinking about your industry, the events, right? People are more haphazard. They just connect when somebody invites them. It's
Yeah.
being systematic and focused and strategic.
That's really. I just had this idea. I'm going to say it live, and you might think I'm never going to speak to this woman again.
Oh boy.
I thought, I'm doing LinkedIn Lives, and maybe, I can get you on and you can tear mine apart just to, be a guinea pig. And you can just go through and say, look, you haven't done this and you haven't done that. And, this won't work and all of that. Because the thing is, people need to recognize how important these things are, really. And having an expert that says, this isn't working, or, having a bit of a guinea pig, but you probably think, oh, this is a really bad idea, Janice,
Well, when you're talking about guinea pig, you mean as far as your profile or as far as your network?
Well, whether it was one or the other,
Yeah,
yeah,
we could probably do that. Like
yeah,
we could probably have some fun with that.
yeah, exactly. I'm not gonna update it and make it look amazing now, kind of thing. Because I just think it's really good for people to put themselves under the microscope all the time. You think you might be customer centric, uh, but it's still all about us, really. And it's just getting somebody to kind of like, often we can't do things for ourselves because we've only got one filter and it's all about us. It's when someone else is looking at it and they're interpreting it how another customer would. So yeah,
Well,
that would be
yeah, you're making a
interesting.
great point. I mean, even people who consider themselves very advanced with this, like myself, like I do this all day. I can learn and get better myself every day of the week, right? So you have to have that mindset that, we all can be improving and learning from each other. So I love that. Yeah.
And this still a relatively new tool. It's relatively new. I mean, we've moved from it being a CV, a resume online, to
Yeah.
being, a really important business tool. So, you said lifelong learner is really important, and we're never there isn't such a thing as perfection. We're
Right.
constantly evolving and improving. So yeah, well, I might take you up on that, really. If I'm beginning to feel nervous.
Oh no, no, we'd have fun.
All right, so I'd like to talk about customer experiences, and buyer experience in particular is something that I talk a lot about, and how it impacts our sales revenue. So, I'd like to get your perspective on how much experience you can convey online so that the customer knows that the journey they're going on with you is going to be something they will enjoy, they're going to get value out of. How do you start that online? How do you make sure you're giving them the experience online so that they know what they're going to get?
I love that. So it's not just being an expert in something, because people want to work with people that they have similar values, that they can admire, that they like, that they have, like, they like the personality. There's all those like personal elements. It's not just there's plenty of people that have the expertise, right? So they're looking for that full package. So really it's about being yourself, being who you are, who you bring to your customer, your client. You need to bring that online in a professional way. So yes, it comes across on your profile, but it does come across big time on your content, and especially in your commenting, because people are going to learn. So it's going to be, there's so much more opportunity for visibility with commenting. And so you can make sure you're following the people that are talking about those topics that you have expertise in, that you can bring value to that conversation, not just saying great posts, but actually adding value. They're going to see your thought process and how you interpret things, and maybe you've got like a cute, fun way of explaining it or whatever, like that you're talking about your approach, bringing it to like an actual way that you view the world, not just here's the fact, right? But more of your insights. So I think that, and people look for that. In fact, there's been a lot of studies that buyers, they make a lot of their decisions based on what they see online, because they don't even want to have the conversation. They don't want to pick up the phone until they've seen enough online that they're starting to feel comfortable, which is very different from a few decades ago when the phone call would be the beginning part. There was no online. Now they're judging all of our online interactions before the phone call or the
I
Zoom.
often explain commenting is the conversation, really. So you comment, someone else comments, and whatever. And it's like being live, having a two-way conversation, that kind of tennis back and forth, really. And I think it's really interesting, the point that you make, that actually that's how people understand more how you think and your expertise and your knowledge. And it's almost like the character of the way you speak as well. So I think that's a really interesting point. You really did get me thinking about the comments is where people gain more from you than if you're, writing an article. It's a bit contrived, isn't it, really? And it's all about what I want to give as opposed to commenting on others. So yeah, that's a really interesting point. Put more into my comments.
Look at your commenting, Janice.
Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh, I'm getting really nervous.
I know you're doing a good job on that, and also on the collaborative articles. It's all good.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, so what tried and tested strategy would you offer listeners on how to scale their sales?
Well, so we talked, as far as scaling the sales, I think it's basically starting out with those foundations, making sure that the entire team has a co-branded but personal branded, buyer-focused presence that works in conjunction with the company page, but it's mostly personal, right? As well as having strategic relationships. Can you imagine if an entire organization has the right connections and then you take the executive level, having those people have the strategic connections, because oftentimes the sellers rely on those executive connections, right? And the executives can be more valuable when they have also systematically made those connections, right? And then sort of activating everyone with content, with learning how to do the best outreach, using Sales Navigator. Like there's a lot, Sales Navigator can definitely help you scale, especially if you've got the content and the executive leadership involved in the whole process. So yeah, there's a lot we can do.
This is really interesting because I've never thought about this before. So thank you for this. And that this is a really intentional, almost like, like you're thinking in a the way that you're targeting a customer, you've got the whole operation involved, and you can more or less map this out in terms of the relationships that you have at all levels of the organization, matched against the target customer that you want to grow into, the relationships you have there. And it's very intentional that you're talking about, Sandra, the way that you go about doing this. And it's really made me think about the way that I would probably think of doing this offline, and I might talk about it, but actually intentionally matching this all up online as well. Very interesting.
Well, in Sales Navigator, you can do that mapping. So that's exactly what I'm talking about, because, and so really understanding, we used to call it 4x4. Some people call it 3x3, understanding from a functional level across, because typically in a B2B environment, it gets back to that, going to the company page and find you only have one connection. That's really a problem. Whereas you want to see, all right, I need to know finance, I need to know operations, I need to know marketing. What are those functional areas? And then what are the levels? I need to know the C-suite, the VP, the director level. So right there, you're talking, a good chunk of people, and not to mention all the influencers and any other senior leaders. So yeah, mapping those out and making sure you're using every asset. These are all assets. We have the connections within our company to these other organizations. They're all assets that we need to deploy.
Yeah, yeah. Often we see in LinkedIn, like kind of the way that we should put content out there, but it's pretty pointless. If you're just putting stuff out, but there isn't a strategy behind it, that it's going to hit the right people because the right people are already within your pipeline. So yeah, there seems to be like a lot of work to do before you actually start trying to get the message out.
Yeah.
Yeah, love it.
Definitely.
Love it. Really valuable content and insight there. So, who is your hero or shero, Sandra?
Well, I have a lot of people that I am thankful and grateful for, but I'd say from my career perspective, it would be my dad. So my dad worked at Xerox in sales, and he was there in the 60s and 70s. He's 95 right now.
Oh,
And so he was there, and that was the time in the 70s when women were first getting into sales. That was the time of Jill Conrath, right? At Xerox. And they were killing it. And the men were like, whoa. And so I was the daughter who graduated school, wasn't sure what I was going to do. And he encouraged me to go into sales, which I never thought of. And so that was the beginning of my B2B sales career. It was from his experience at Xerox, sharing that with me. And all those years helping me, encouraging me, asking me, he's to this day at 95, he wants to know, what deals am I working on?
oh, that's fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah. So it's
yeah.
great. Yeah.
I mean, it's lovely having a father like that that's very much in your camp, that's supporting and pushing you forward. And yeah, very
Yeah,
nice.
I was born extremely lucky with parents that are both alive, 88 and 95, who
Wow.
are extremely wonderful. Yeah, so very
Yeah,
lucky.
yeah. Love that. Thank you very much for that. So, how can listeners get hold of you, Sandra?
Well, LinkedIn is my favorite, of course. So just look up Sandra Long. I know it's a very common name. In the Boston area, that might help you find me if you know how to use LinkedIn search. So that's my number one place to find me, and I look forward to any connections.
Excellent. Oh, thank you for being a guest on Scale Your Sales podcast and sharing really interesting and insightful comments to help us to develop our profile and grow strategically our network.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Scale Your Sales podcast. If you like this discussion, feel free to listen to other episodes or watch the captioned show on YouTube and subscribe to future episodes. I would really appreciate it if you would leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you.